So let's go ahead and get started. For anyone I haven't met yet, I'm Annie Nichols. I'm the Farm and Ranch Support Manager at the High Desert Food and Farm Alliance. We cover the Central Oregon region, which includes Crook, Deschutes, and Jefferson County, as well as Warm Springs. I am posting a survey. This is a pre-survey, and it would be really awesome if you guys could just take like 1 minute. It's super quick while I'm introducing everyone. But if you could fill this out, it really helps us when we're applying for our own grants at HDFFA. And so that would be much appreciated. Today, I will be introducing Erika Moellmer. She's the Business and Cooperative Programs Specialist for the USDA for Oregon State. And then I will pass it over to Katrina Van Dis, and she is our Executive Director at HDFFA, and she writes all of our amazing grants and has been doing it for many years. So she knows exactly what the USDA wants to hear. And so with that, I will pass it over to Erika.
Thank you so much, Annie. Hi, everyone. I guess I will just start off by introducing myself, although Annie just did that. But again, my name is Erika Moellmer, and I am the Business and Cooperative Programs Specialist for USDA Rural Development, and I am located out of our Portland State office. Okay, next slide, please. So first, I would like to talk a little bit about rural development, or RD. RD is an agency housed under the U.S. Department of Agriculture, along with our sister agencies from Farm Service Agency, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and Risk Management Agency. The mission of RD is to assist rural communities in creating prosperity, so they are self-sustaining and economically thriving through investments that create ladders of opportunity, build regional resilience, and support the growth of emerging markets. We have more than 40 loan, grant, and technical assistance programs to support economic development in rural communities. Next slide, please. So at the national level, programs and services are delivered through 3 agencies: Rural Business and Cooperative Service, Rural Housing Service, and the Rural Utility Service. The Vapg is administered by the Rural Business and Cooperative Service. Thank you. Now I will transition into talking about the Vapg. All right, so the Value-Added Producer Grant Program helps agricultural producers enter into value-added activities related to the planning, processing, and marketing of new products. The goals of this program are to generate new products, create and expand marketing opportunities, and increase producer income. Grants are awarded through a national competition each fiscal year. Applications are requested through a notice published in the Federal Register and through an announcement posted on grants.gov. So this fiscal year, the Vapg deadline to apply online is April 29th, 2021 for online. Yeah, I just said that. And deadline for paper is May 4th. If you are considering applying for this grant, I strongly encourage you to reach out to myself before submitting your application to ensure you're submitting the most competitive application possible. Please make sure you give me ample time to review your application so that I can get through them all and review them thoroughly. So I did see a direct message from Noah asking if I can highlight the recent changes to the Vapg, and I will go over that now. So an amended Vapg notice was published in the Federal Register on March 5th. The amended notice includes details from the Consolidated Appropriation Act, which was passed in December of 2020. So the Consolidated Appropriations Act provided the Vapg an additional $35 million in COVID-19 relief funds. Accordingly, the total is now $76 million in program funding. The agency is extending the application deadline to that March 4th deadline that I mentioned in the previous slide, and allowing for the application submission to be submitted through email. And lastly, and the most important element change, is that they're eliminating the awarding of points for the level of commitment category. So they're lowering your match portion from a 1-to-1 requirement to just a 10% of the grant, the total grant amount that you're requesting. So that's a big deal to a lot of producers. And the way that they have structured how they're going to award these funds is in a kind of priority setting. So the Vapg is scored at a national level, as I mentioned previously, and whoever scores the highest is going to receive the COVID-19 funding with the 10% match reduction. You don't need to submit your application with the 10% match already in there. You can submit it with the 1-to-1 or the 10%. They're all going to be evaluated the same. It's strictly going to be evaluated on everything except for that level of commitment category in section 1C. And we can get into the actual toolkit a little later, but hopefully that makes sense. The anticipated award announcement date has remained unchanged from the original notice. So September 30th of 2021 is the date that the government is going to aim to make the announcements. So there's that information. All right. Who is eligible? So agricultural producers such as independent producers, agricultural producer groups, farmer or rancher cooperatives, and majority-controlled producer-based business ventures. You may receive priority points if you are a beginning farmer or rancher, a socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher, a small or medium-sized farm or ranch structured as a family farm, a farmer or rancher cooperative, or you are proposing a mid-tier value chain. Okay, so what is considered a value-added product? There are, the next slide, please, thank you. There are 5 categories that qualify a value-added product. Change in physical state, produced in a manner that enhances the value, product segregation, farm or ranch-based renewable energy, and or locally produced agricultural food products. And we'll go into those next slide. All right, so a change in physical state is an irreversible processing activity that alters the raw agricultural commodity and enhances its value, and is something other than just a post-harvest process that primarily acts to preserve the commodity for a later sale. Next slide, please. The next category, produced in a manner that enhances the value. So the value-added product must result from the use of a recognizably coherent set of agricultural production practices in the growing of the raw agricultural commodity, such that a differentiated market is identified, differentiated market identity is created. So that's pretty self-explanatory. It's basically just the two on the screen, organic or I guess free range chickens. It could be any animal, but you get the idea. All right, next slide, please. Product segregation. So value-added products resulting from physically separating or distancing an agricultural commodity from other varieties. On the screen, you can see we have GMO corn, GMO corn from non-GMO corn, and organic is also in this category. Next slide, please. So this is probably the most rare VAPG project type that we get, but it's eligible. So this could be an agricultural commodity that is used to generate renewable energy on the farm or ranch owned or leased by the independent producer. Dairy manure that is turned into methane through an anaerobic digester is one project that we've seen in the past. What's not eligible for this program, but may be eligible for our other program that's offered, our REAP program, is on-farm generation of energy from wind, solar, geothermal, or hydro sources. So if it's not produced on the farm and you're not turning it into energy in some way, then it's not eligible. Next slide, please. All right, and lastly, we have the locally produced agricultural food product category, which is any agricultural food product that is raised, produced, and distributed within 400 miles of the product's origin or within the state in which the product is produced. And you'll have to, show on your application where and how you're going to keep within this locally produced category. All right, so how may the funds be used? Working capital expenses may be used to pay eligible project expenses related to the processing and/or marketing of a value-added product. Some examples include processing costs, including labor, utilities, packaging, labeling, ingredients. You can also use the grant funds to purchase additional raw commodity inventory from third parties, up to 50% of the total amount required for the project. So if you have one head of cattle and you really want to increase your customer base and your sales, you can purchase an additional head of cattle. So it'd be 50% of what's used for the project. You can also use working capital funds for marketing and advertising expenses. And the maximum grant available for a working capital grant is $250,000. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. All right, planning activities. This is the other type of grant that you can pursue. You can do planning or working capital. So the planning activity expenses may be used to pay a qualified third-party consultant for the development of a feasibility study, marketing, and/or business plan related to the processing and marketing of the value-added product. It can't be a general study conducted on the success of your business as a whole. It has to be specified towards the value-added product. And that grant is a maximum of $75,000. So I will touch on some ineligible uses of funds. Some activities that are ineligible for both planning and working capital is purchase of land, buildings, or equipment. Equipment is considered processing equipment or fixed equipment. The preparation of the grant application itself. Research and development, which can get confusing when you're talking about a planning grant, because research and development you would think is what qualifies as a planning grant. But what it's saying here is you can't do research and development towards stuff that isn't related to the success of a value-added product. You can't do research for a university, for example. Architectural or engineering design work, and expenses for the production, harvesting, or delivery of the product to a processing facility. So those are just a couple ineligible uses of funds. Oops, I forgot to update this screen. Gosh darn it. The VAPG requires a 1-to-1 match normally in a normal year. Of course, that was reduced to 10% for the COVID funds. Once those expire, then once they're all used up, you will have to do a 1-to-1 match. But that can be in the form of cash or in kind. Examples of in-kind match contribution include time spent on labor for processing and marketing or raw commodity. And it can only really be those two things. You can't include the value of your space. You can't include the value of your delivery vehicles. It has to just be time or raw commodity. And all funds, including matching funds, must be spent on eligible expenses only. And they must be spent, the matching funds must be spent at a 1-to-1 rate each reimbursement. So you can't request all your Vapg dollars first and then use up your matching funds after. You can do the opposite of that. You can use up all your matching funds first and then request all the Vapg dollars, but it just can't be that the other way around. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so how do you get started? The first thing you're going to want to do is request a DUNS number. So grants are not awarded to individuals, federal grants are not awarded to individuals who are not associated with an organization or a business. So the requirement for all applicants, including sole proprietors, are the same, and that is that you must all have a DUNS number. And the timeline for this can take a few business days. It's not too long. On the other hand, you also need to register through the System for Award Management, or SAM. Applicants must provide a valid SAM registration or evidence from SAM that they have begun the registration process. And registration must be complete before the award can be made. So before that September 30th deadline, or award announcement date. And the timeline for this can take up to a month. I know that they're having some issues right now. I've received feedback from applicants saying that they are having a hard time getting a hold of anyone from SAM, or that it's taking a really long time. So the sooner you start this process, the better, so that you know you will have at least the registration process going by the time you submit your application. And that is the end. So I will say, please contact me, Erika, for the application toolkits, because we do provide toolkits to make it easier for our applicants. And the toolkits, they provide guidance, they outline the requirements and all of the different forms that need to accompany the toolkit. It's provided in the toolkit itself. Next slide, please. Just 3 more. This is the USDA's full equal employment opportunity statement, and we have to put that in there. So, all right. Anybody have any questions?
I do have a question. I'm wondering what percent, like how many people are applying for this, and or maybe in the past, like past data on that, and like what percentage of people who apply are awarded, and maybe like average amount of grant, things like that. Oh,
You're on mute,
sorry,
Erika.
sorry, I know. I got a little alert on the screen. All right. So last year, for example, we had about, I think it was 27 applications, and only 15 of them were awarded. And the average grant size, I'd say most applicants apply for the full 250 if they're doing the working capital. But it kind of just depends on the scope of their project and their need, and their ability to provide the match, of course. That's kind of what dictates the amount. But yeah, about half were awarded last year. But that being said, this year is probably going to look a lot different with the additional funding from COVID and the reduced match. So we expect the amount of awards to be significantly higher this year, because there's just so much money.
More money. And that's nationwide, 27 applicants?
What'd you say? I'm sorry?
Oh, and that's nationwide?
Oh, no. That's just for Oregon.
Just for Oregon. Okay, awesome.
Yeah. I have no idea how many nationwide, but we did around 3.5 million in Oregon. And I will say that Oregon was number 3 on the list for the most applications. I think, of course, California and Washington were the other 2, first and second, and we were 3rd. So got that West Coast competition.
Thank you.
Erika, you have another question from Noah in the chat. He's asking, can you differentiate eligible use of funds for processing versus not eligible use of production?
Yes, I can. So what I tell applicants is when you're thinking of the timeline from the time when you're going to be, raising your product or growing your product to the time where Vapg activities become eligible. It's when you remove the plant from the ground or you butcher the animal. Once it's no longer being tended to in a growth phase, that's when you can start the processing of it. Once you pull the carrot out of the ground, you begin the processing by cleaning it, maybe pickling it, and then that's what's considered processing. Production, on the other hand, I know those words get kind of confusing, but production would be anything that pertains to the maybe fertilizing of the ground or tilling of the ground or preparing that product to go in the ground. And there is no value-added activity happening yet. So I hope that's clear enough. If not, we can use a more specific example with your product.
Great, thank you. This one's from Katie. She's asking, if 2 independent producers are involved in a Vapg project, is it acceptable to have one as the primary applicant and the other as a partner? And does that mean they will get the extra point to qualify as multiple independent producers?
Katie, can you unmute and give me your specific example?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so I'm working with 2 producers on a project. So like they're both involved with the growing of the commodity, and then they it's a planning grant, so that might help understand. So they're trying to do a feasibility study to understand what the market potential of their product is. So I was just in looking at that and realizing, they might get scored higher if there's more than just one person. I was just wondering if you can phrase it that way, or if that doesn't really matter to the reviewers.
So it does matter to the reviewers because you're getting into the applicant eligibility section. So when it comes to the applicant type, all of the applicants need to be independent producers. So they have to be the ones that actually make the product. And just so long as the applicant is eligible, it doesn't give priority to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. They're all just either eligible or ineligible. Where you're going to get the priority points is if you qualify as the beginning farmer rancher, a socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher, those priority point categories.
Right. But there's not like a disadvantage, or I guess I just don't want it to be confusing if there's kind of 2 producers working together on it. I don't want to phrase it so that it sounds confusing. So I don't know if there's any disadvantage to saying it that way.
No, I don't think so, because I mean, we work with some pretty confusing organizational structures, and I mean, at the end of the day, if it's one independent producer or if it's multiple, as long as they're all eligible, then it's fine.
Sure, that makes sense. Thank you.
CJ has another question. Our project is fruit producers and the value added piece is distilling or fermenting. Where can we look at a database that shows any previous awards that were granted in this scenario?
So we don't have a great database. Each year after the awards are announced, they come out with just a congressional announcement, and it's very, I don't know, not well documented in a database type setting. So I don't know if we would have anything like that available. I mean, yeah, I can't think of anything right now. What exactly would you want to know about previous grants? You know, is it like how their toolkit was filled out? Was it how much are they asking for, or what?
Oh, just to get a general idea of what was acceptable in the past and what they were doing and stuff.
Mhm,
Maybe not
mhm.
a formal database, but just how we can just read about other successful.
Yeah, we do have success stories, I think, published on the national site,
Mhm.
but off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you where to go or how to get them, because the only type of reporting they do is to our congressmen and women. And it's very, they hide all of the PII, and it's just very general. So it's not going to be super in depth unless you can find another fruit producer that had applied in the past, and you can just sit down with them and pick their brain. That's really the best that we could do, I think. Sorry.
CJ, let me follow up with you on that. I feel like I have seen some and I'm trying to find them now. Another resource I've found really helpful as I've been diving into this is the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition has a really great document. And I'll put it here in the chat so you guys can access it.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. I might even be able to save that and use it. So thanks.
Yeah. It's very like it gives you all the eligibility and then like some ranking criteria, which I found really helpful to like kind of sift through some of the government words that are too big.
Yeah, the National Sustainable Agricultural Coalition actually was the #1 lobbyist for the COVID match reduction. They were the ones that made it happen. So they've been very strong with their work that they're doing. So it's really cool to see.
Well, great. If we don't have any other questions, I will pass the reins over to Katrina, and she'll give us some of her best practices she's learned over the years. And Katrina, I'll let you take it from here.
I was just looking up, there's a portal that USDA has that is where I often go to look for past grants. I'll put this in the chat. I think that it's a different portal. I don't know if this is for NIFA, which is a different funding arm than rural development, but I will look and see if I can find, because I think there's another source called Priest. Is that familiar, Erika?
That's not familiar to me, but I'm actually going to reach out to our public affairs official right now and see if we have something like this portal that NIFA has.
Yeah. I also have an example grant that I wrote in 2012. Well, it's not an example, but it's a grant I helped someone write in 2012 for value added producer grant. It's obviously old, so it's not the same material, but it gives you, can you hear me, CJ? Okay. Sometimes my mic isn't that good. But I can send it to anyone who's interested that can use it as just like to look at as way that we wrote some of the questions, the answers to the question. Yeah, if that's of interest, just let us know. So I have looked at this grant, and Erika, you can correct me if I'm ever wrong, but I've looked at this grant this year, and it's pretty, it can be overwhelming, and there's a lot of questions. A lot of the questions are, you just have to read them thoroughly and answer them. I mean, they make sense once you start getting into it, but there's just a lot of questions. So the sooner you start looking at what they're asking, the better. What I have suggested to people is that you pull out the narrative questions from the specific questions that they ask, like, are you a producer, individual, independent producer? Are you collaborative? And start working on the questions that really require you to write a narrative versus just check a box, so that you focus on that piece, because you can get more down in all the detail of the toolkit. And really there's only like 5-ish questions that require you to write something. My suggestion is if you're answering those questions, and I suggest this for all grants, but when you answer a question, you want to answer the question. And that sounds obvious, but it's not, because often people get kind of like bogged down on what they're thinking about their project, and then they kind of lose track of what they were trying to answer in the first place. So I always suggest that you start answering the question with a statement. So if it says, for example, what is your baseline revenue for, let's say you're making carrot juice out of carrot. What is your baseline revenue for that? And so you would say my baseline revenue in the last 10 years, or my baseline from 2010 was this, and I've incrementally increased this much. Like you want to answer the question and quantify the question as best you can. Assume that, I always say, assume that you're trying to explain your project to a family member. So they probably have an idea of what you do for your job, or what you're growing, or what you're processing, but they're not in the weeds about it. So the reviewers tend to be educated about the subject, but not about your project in particular. So imagine you're trying to explain it to a family or a friend person, and you have to go into enough detail to really give a sense of what your project is. So if you, like, for example, if you, let's use CJ. So say, what were you doing with your project, CJ?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Fermenting and distilling fruit.
Okay. So, like, you would want to tell me what your raw product is.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you just said fruit, I would want to know probably what type of fruit, so I get a sense.
Mm-hmm.
I would want to know, like, give a sense of like how you're doing it. Are you, what materials are you using? What's your facility capacity? If you say that you're gonna bump up in revenue by 200% in year 1 and 500 in year 2, like, I really want to know that as a reviewer, you know that you can increase your revenue that much and how you're going to get there. Don't just kind of put out numbers, just like, this goes back to your baseline. Like, we have X number of apples that we used in 2020, and in 2021 we expect to grow from 1 pound to 10 pounds. Obviously not that, but and then it's helpful but not necessary to kind of say how you're doing that, what that process looks like. The more the reviewer, but be succinct, don't like tell a story, but the more a reviewer can understand and imagine what you're doing and have a sense that you actually can feasibly do this project, the better you're going to review, right? So if someone doesn't understand something in the chain of events that you're doing, that's a question that they're going to have to ask in their mind. And what you want to do is avoid questions of the reviewer, like, do they really understand what it means to press apples into juice? You know, make sure that you give them a sense like, I have been doing this, or it's new and that's why I'm doing a planning grant, is to understand it. The other thing that I suggest is that the budget, you really start now to think about the budget. Erika, can you clarify this? If you don't have a business plan, you can't apply for over $50,000. Is that correct?
Yes.
So it's not necessarily super clear. Like if you don't read the toolkit through, you won't realize that until too late. And so if you don't have a business plan, your project has to be less than 50,000. That's going to limit some of you, and you have to think about where you want to spend that money. If you do have a business plan, then you want to think about what capital costs, or not capital costs, what supplies will you anticipate that you'll need as you grow. So right now you have a press that can do 25 apples per hour, and you actually want to double or triple that. Like what do you have to buy to do that or get there? Because what I found in grants is that if I don't include, if I don't think through the whole process to begin with, and I don't include things that cost money along the line, I end up having to cover a lot of the costs myself. So as you're writing your narrative, also think about your budget and how does that follow your narrative. And what I do is I kind of write down like pie in the sky, what do I want? What do I need to be successful? And then you can always pare back. But I always encourage people to like really just write out what you want so that you can get all your ideas out, and like in the beginning, feel free to just like write everything and then put it together. I don't know if is there a page limit on it? No page limit. Don't be verbose though, because if you're also too wordy, then reviewers also get lost, and you know, we're human people. When we review, we're just gonna like glaze over.
Yeah, I will say that I agree with you there. Sometimes you're gonna want to answer the same answer in a section earlier in the application that you would later in the application when they ask you to do a narrative of your project as a whole. And that's okay to, you know, be repetitive to a certain extent. But if you find yourself referring back to one chart or one appendix item multiple times, you don't want to put that appendix item in there over and over. You'll just say, refer to my invoice in Appendix C, which can really help cut down your page limit and make it just a lot more clear for the reviewer to what you're trying to communicate.
I just had a thought. I have to like go find it again. Oh, one of the questions is, what is the indirect and direct benefit to you as a producer? And think about that really broadly. It's a difficult question to answer if you're not used to thinking that way. It's a very kind of economic way. Like, some of these questions come about because Congress feeds back to USDA, like we want more quantitative measurements of how producers are actually benefiting from this. So then the questions get kind of like confusing because they're trying to meet multiple things. They're trying to have you answer a question that they can understand for the grant that also allows a congressperson to know the impact. So when they ask things like, what are the direct and indirect benefits? How is this improving your production of the value-added product? How is this increasing your sales? How is this increasing revenues, consumer base? Does it improve your marketing? Does it improve your outreach? Does it have direct job benefits? Does it have, and then indirect is like, does it have indirect job benefits? So say CJ hires Brandy to help, well, maybe Katie, Heidi, and Sarah Lee then actually get jobs because of it, like the trickle down effect. I do have information that can help you figure that you could put into your application about the direct benefit. We have like numbers because we did a Central Oregon economic impact assessment. And so I know for ranchers versus farmers, for X number of sales, I can tell you how many jobs are actually created indirectly or directly. So I can give you that information, which is really helpful in your application. And I hope that makes sense. But basically, say, for example, for every $100 in sales, you can hire one more person, but 10 more people in the economy are hired because of it. Those are the kind of things that they're looking for. Does that make sense? I feel like I might have made that sound more complicated.
That makes sense to me. I also tell applicants, you're right. It is a weird question, but it's required. And if you skip it, it can actually deem your application ineligible. So just even putting anything in there like, okay, directly, this project is going to benefit my business because of the obvious. It's going to increase my customer base and it's going to increase my revenue. Indirectly, it may provide a more healthy option to my local community for whatever product. Yeah. It may bring tourism to my small city and therefore, generate revenue for my city. It may indirectly create jobs. And so, yeah, think anything indirectly as being, and it's hard to know, it's an estimate. It is. It's not something that we're expecting anyone to be like, yes, for sure, 100%, it's going to create 6 jobs at the local winery. But give us what you think is the most reasonable answer for the indirect benefits, because that is probably one of the most missed questions on the application.
It's a tough one to answer. You can always, if you have questions, you can always just send them to us and we can help you. If you're like, I'm really stuck here, I can always give tips on how to write something, or if you are like, can you just read this over to see if it makes sense? We're available to do that. I do want to leave time if anyone has questions about anything that I've just presented, or you have specific questions that you want to address about your application. I mean, it's okay if no one has questions. I always like to offer this space.
Is that indirect benefits question part of the planning grant too?
I don't, Erica would have to answer that.
Yep, I'm looking it up right now. I'm pulling up the toolkit. I know for sure it's in the working capital grant, but
So Katie, you're applying for a planning grant, and CJ,
Yes.
yeah. CJ, you're thinking of a actual implementation project? Okay. And then Noah, what are you thinking of?
So this is Noah. I'm just tuning in to get an update on the Vapg program. It's been a couple of years since I looked at it as a business advisor to SBDC clients. Sometimes we talk to farmers and just want to kind of stay up to date and current on the programs and what the eligibility requirements are, so we can pass that along. So I guess you can count me as a technical assistance provider.
Okay.
Do have a quick question though. So I know there was an example used under the 5 types of products that could be done, and under the first one, under change of state, wine was one of the examples. Taking grapes and making wine, and I know there's been kind of in the discussion here talk about fermenting fruit. So you could do cider with that, or you could presumably do some kind of alcoholic beverage. So I'm just curious, just for clarity's sake, would alcoholic beverages other than wine work? Like, let's say a distillery or something like that? And are there some types that would not work? I just want to be sure.
yeah, that's a good question. Yes, you can do any type of alcoholic beverage. We have a whiskey applicant that I've spoken with recently. We've done kombucha, we've done wine, we've done hard cider. So anything like that is totally eligible for the change in physical state methodology. Let's see, what was it? I was just thinking. Yeah, sorry, I forgot what I was going to say next. But yeah, the short answer is yes.
Awesome. And then in I think it was the 4th example, farm and ranch based renewable energy. You mentioned like an anaerobic digester. Are there any other project examples you can give examples of that are not wind, solar, geothermal, or hydro?
Yeah, the only other one that I've heard of being successful is ethanol production from wheat or whatever grain you use to make ethanol. Corn into biodiesel generated on the farm is what we had listed here. Biodiesel. But you could also, I think, do ethanol. But yeah, it has to create a renewable energy source. Although I don't know if by creating biodiesel, how it's done. Maybe that's also done in a anaerobic digester. I'm not 100% sure. I've actually never had a project like that. So I'd have to look into that further.
So how about if a farm was gathering up all their discarded husks and waste materials and repurposing that into compost material that they wanted to then package and resell?
That's considered change in physical state.
So that would work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Just about everything.
Yeah. I mean, most of the value-added activities qualify under change in physical state. The only ones that really don't are if you're just selling the raw produce and it's stamped organic, or you're selling your raw grapes and you're only locally producing or locally selling them. So those two, stamping it organic and stamping it locally produced, adds a premium to them. And that's where that value added designation comes from.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about the difference between kind of that $50,000 threshold and the $250,000 threshold. Is there anything in there that like really, or is that because that was just a thing in the past, or is that still a thing or not?
Yeah. So I know it seems like I'm talking about grants within grants, but the overall project is called the value-added producer grant, but you can take it two different directions. You can do the working capital grant or the planning grant. And then within the working capital grant, you have to choose a project type. And there are 3 different project types. There is the first is emerging market. An emerging market project is for any producer that hasn't been producing and selling their product for more than 2 years. So less than 2 years. They would need to select emerging market because it's new, it's emerging, it's something that they don't have more than 2 years of history with a customer base and a revenue base. And that project is $50,000 or more, and it requires both a feasibility study and a business plan. The second, which is the most common, is market expansion. This is for applicants or producers who have produced and sold their product for more than 2 years, and they need the money to expand their markets. And that's for $50,000 or more. That does not require a feasibility study. It only requires a business plan. The last project type is the simplified application, and that project type does not require a feasibility study, nor does it require a business plan or a marketing plan. However, you do need to provide enough information for us to determine if the project is even doable, but you don't need to pay someone to create a huge feasibility study or a business plan. And that is for $50,000 or less. And that can be for both an emerging market project or a market expansion. So you can have been producing it for 2 years or not. You can apply for it not just the same. So that hasn't been changed with the new COVID money. It's the same.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I've got one quick question to follow up with on the email that I sent you earlier. And just to sort of reiterate, that email I sent you earlier was asking, can we apply, year after year for this VAP grant? And your answer was yes, but you can't apply with the same project. Mm-hmm. And so would, say, applying, in your first year and choosing that project type emerging market, and then in the next year choosing that project type expansion, like even if it was like, we're sort of building out an orchard so that we can start to produce our own fruit brandies. So like generally speaking, it's the same project, but would that be different enough for, the reviewers of this grant to say, yes, you are awarded?
Yeah, so no, unfortunately, the project type changing doesn't negate the fact that it needs to be either a new product or a new market each year. So
Okay.
you could, though, for example, apply for the emerging market grant project, and then the next year come back and do the market expansion. But instead of only targeting like wholesalers in Oregon, you could do wholesalers in Washington or direct to customer in Oregon or online. It doesn't just have to be totally a whole new product and a whole new market. You can keep the same product, but mix up your market significantly enough for us to be like, okay, she will be expanding, and it's not just going to be money that goes into the same markets is the goal of that market expansion project type.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Yep.
It's 4 o'clock. I'll hand it back to you, Amy.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you guys so much. Erika and Katrina, we really appreciate you presenting today on your expertise. I know I have a lot of my questions answered, and I hope everyone else does as well. I'll send a follow-up email with a recording. I have a list. We're going to look into getting a list of past projects sent out. I think that one in the chat was from 2016. I also have the economic impact report that you guys are welcome to use when talking about indirect impacts in Central Oregon. We have our National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition cheat sheet, and then I'll also be sending out a survey to gather some more info from you guys. So thank you so much to everyone who attended and to our presenters, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you, Annie. Thanks, everyone. Bye.